Hello and welcome to this week's Geek TV, our weekly dive into the crazy world of all things Doctor Who. Joining me to review this week's episode, Flatline, as always, is Digital Spy's TV editor Morgan Jeffrey. Say hello, Morgan.
Hello.
So Flatline, first impressions, Morgan, good episode, bad episode, so-so episode?
Yeah, so-so for me, middling.
You always refuse to say an episode is bad.
I can never...
Next year, you're like, oh, it was rubbish, that episode. But immediately after, you refuse to say it's a bad episode.
This did have some strong points to it. You know, the early buzz for Flatline has actually been really, really strong. So possibly me and you, because I don't think it was your favourite episode either.
Definitely not.
No. So I think, the tide might be against us once again this week. I thought, actually, it had a really strong central conceit. I thought the idea of the monsters was quite original. I thought, it's a cool sci-fi twist on, a locked room mystery. But for me, the execution wasn't that strong. I felt a bit like Time Heist, which was, another episode I didn't particularly favour. It felt a bit like an aimless runaround. It was a string of incidents.
It was very similar to Time Heist in the sense that on paper, someone, it sounds like if you're having a brainstorming meeting for some good ideas for Doctor Who.
Bank Heist in Space.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
And then this one about, the idea of, a planet of two dimensions sounds like quite an interesting prospect.
Yeah, well, I think it is an interesting prospect, and I think it is a strong idea, but I don't feel like Flatline had much more to it than a strong idea. Once, they descend underground and they're just on the run from the monsters, for me it all fell apart a little bit. It was, as I say, it was just a bit of a madcap dash that really went nowhere.
Especially when they got the train involved and things like that. It felt like it was just like throwing lots of things at the wall and hoping something would... quite literally throwing things at the wall.
At the wall, yeah.
hoping that it would stick.
Yeah.
I guess one of the disappointing things was the Dr. Clara relationship. That storyline, although it was central to the episode, it didn't have the same flow to it, and sort of intrigue that it's had throughout the rest of the series.
See, I don't know if I agree with that, because that, for me, was one of the strong parts of the episode, the Dr. Clara relationship. I felt like the main thrust of the story is a little lackluster, but I did enjoy how their relationship is continuing to evolve. After overcoming her wobble, as she called it, and now she's back on board with the TARDIS. But now you've got this new twist where maybe the way the Doctor acts is corrupting her. She starts to empathise with him a little more and understand him a little more, and maybe, it does start to corrupt her, as I said. So I actually thought that was quite an interesting twist to take on things.
I thought it was just a bit too obvious, and it was a bit too explaining things, whereas throughout the rest of the series it's been a little bit more subtle, the relationship and how the sort of the evolution of this Doctor and his relationship with Clara has come about has been quite subtly done, and this week it felt it was a bit more like, here you go, Clara, you're the Doctor.
Yeah.
Look what happens when you're the Doctor. You have to make decisions.
Yeah.
It was a little bit too in your face. Another thing that I found a little bit disappointing was the character of Rigsy, who I guess was the sort of main supporting character in this episode. Not anything to do with the young actor. Just felt it was a sort of underused character that had potential to be an interesting character in the series, but ultimately was quite flat.
Yeah, nice. Well, this is the thing, I felt like another problem with this episode was a lot of the supporting characters were quite one-dimensional. Another pun, but no, they were quite one-dimensional, and Rigsy was actually one of the more developed. He had a little bit of a backstory. There's the other guy who's the sort of the boss man and he's
angry boss man who is mean to Rigsy.
Exactly, he's just a bit unpleasant. All the other characters are pretty much just nameless victims of the monster.
Gormless train driver.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They don't really have much development or much in the way of character or personality. You have to have some kind of attachment to them. That was another of my problems with Time Heist, and again with Flatline, is if you don't care about the supporting characters, you don't care if they die.
Yeah.
And that's a fundamental problem, and I felt that here.
Were you a bit disappointed that we didn't get to see more of Danny Pink this week? Because I feel he's been a little bit underused in this series. Because I think one of the nice things about having almost a sort of a second companion, a bit like obviously with Rory and Amy, is that you do get that familiarity. You do get that attachment. Are you a bit disappointed that he hasn't been on board more? Rory
was a recurring character, and he wasn't in every single episode. So I don't think he needs to be featured every week. There's episodes where he's absolutely central, like Listen or The Caretaker. But this week, he wasn't really needed. And if he's not needed, there's no point just shoving in a cameo for the sake of it. Just don't have him there. It's slightly ludicrous when Clara's in the midst of danger and answering her mobile phone. And it's like, there's no need to feature Danny this week, so just don't have him in it. Next week, looks like he's more central to the action. So it's fine, and I'm happy for him to be there.
And we've got some more questions from you guys at home. Lewis Adams asks, how many seasons, Morgan, do you think Peter Capaldi will do?
Well, that's interesting because we know he is like a massive Doctor Who superfan.
Yeah.
So, and it's the role of a lifetime for him. So you think he'd want to hang in there for as long as possible. But on the other hand, he did have quite a big grand acting career before Doctor Who. This is only going to ramp up his profile. So there's always that temptation. You kind of like, now it's amped up my profile. I want to jump ship and see what else is out there. I reckon we've got Capaldi for about 4. I reckon he'll stick it out for 4. So that would be, presuming Doctor Who runs that long, all things being well. So that's series 9, 10, maybe even 11. Who knows?
Another question coming from the 13th Doctor, who presumably knows the answer to the last question, asks, were you disappointed with the payoff for the big argument between the Doctor and Clara? Which I presume he means before the Orient Express episode.
I personally wasn't at all, because there was some criticism, people saying, they've completely just ignored the fact that she was so angry with him and that they had this big argument and they've completely retconned this. For me, they didn't ignore it. They confronted it head on. Yeah, it was initially surprising to see her back on board the TARDIS, but the whole point was that they were having this one last trip together. And the whole point was that she's addicted to TARDIS life, and it wasn't so, no matter how angry she gets with him, it's not quite as easy as she thought it would be to end it. And for me, I don't think we've seen the payoff. It says, are you disappointed with the payoff? We've not seen the payoff yet, because their relationship is still changing and still evolving. This week, heavy-handed or not, there was another twist on their dynamic. So yeah, the payoff's still to come, I think.
It would have been a bit tedious to just have the episode where Clara's in a strop in her bedroom. So the Doctor's like, come and help me. Yeah. She's like, no, I won't. No, I'm not helping.
I thought that was a much more interesting way to go as well, the whole thing of her being addicted to TARDIS life, than the more predictable route would have been that they part ways and then she finds herself in trouble. Yeah. And the Doctor turns up to rescue her and then wins her over that way. That's far more predictable a route than the way they went, where maybe she does still have these reservations about the life she's leading and the way he's acting, but she buries those because she loves all other aspects of that life so much.
Before we go, any thoughts on Missy and her iPad? Usually in Doctor Who, you could be watching on anything. It's just like watching Clara on an iPad.
Product placement on the BBC. I can't believe it. It's shocking. Intriguing, isn't it? Because this is the first time we've really seen her express any interest in Clara directly, I think. She calls her my Clara, so there's some kind of connection there. Doesn't bode well for Clara. No. Not that we know Jenna Coleman's definitely leaving, not at all, but it certainly, it doesn't bode well for that character, and sets up the finale in, 1 week really, because it's a 2-part finale, I believe. So it sets that up quite intriguingly, I think.
Okay. Well, that's all we've got time for this week. We'll see you again in 7 days' time for more Geek TV.